He's also a family man of one son and 3 daughters. I'd like to take this great pleasure in welcoming Derek Nepinak to the podium.
It's my great honor to be here this afternoon to address the delegation that's traveled from all the corners of this Turtle Island that we live upon and call our home. I'd like to acknowledge the pipe ceremony that would have started this process, the pipe ceremony that's happened to get the day started each time, the drums, the songs, the singers, including that funny guy that was here a little while ago. Most importantly, our elders who give us the direction we need to do the work that we need to do. Community leaders that are here, chiefs council members, current and past and future chiefs and councils, visiting speakers that have come from far and wide. I watched Isaac's presentation from the live stream, a very brilliant leader of our people, a little bit further east of here on the shores of the waters in our traditional homelands. My name is Derek Nepinak. I am the former Grand Chief at the Assembly of Manitoba Chiefs. I'm also the former chief of my home community, the Pine Creek Anishinaabe people. I'm going to take you down a little bit of a path, starting in our history a little bit about how things have come to be today, including the creation of the Bringing Our Children Home First Nations Family Advocate Office. I think it's very important, very important, that in these colonizing times that we live in, that we hold on to the stories and we hold on to the initiatives and the developments that we have witnessed in the last couple of decades, recognizing the hard work of everybody that's involved in challenging the genocide that we live in. I was born here in St. Boniface, Manitoba, I guess just across the river, in 1974 on a cold winter day. And the Children's Aid Society intervened in my life at birth. You see, my mom was attending school here in the city, and she was but 16 years old when I was born. And she didn't really have the skills to raise a young boy, a baby boy. She was a product of residential school. She was coming out of residential school at a time when everyone was saying that there's no future in the reserve, encouraging children to leave the reserve to go find jobs and prosperity in the urban settings. That's the time that I came into the world. And rather than take me and ship me off somewhere to a different part of the world for money, which was happening to a lot of babies at the time, my mom took me back to the community, back to Pine Creek, where the foundations of whoever I am, whoever I would become, started to form. And it's really that foundation of family and love back home with my family in Pine Creek that brought me back home after traveling in many different directions and having, obtained different levels of education in different places. So the story goes a little bit like this, and I don't mean to be provocative or to be offensive, but we as the grown-ups in the room have to be willing to have difficult discussions about some of the things we've done, some of the things we've witnessed. We have to find a place to have those discussions because they're difficult, but they need to be had because we live in very challenging times. In 2000, when I was at the University of Alberta, I began working with children in care. I was working through my first degree at the University of Alberta. I witnessed the dispossession of our children from their families. Kids were living in group homes and foster placements with no sense of belonging, no sense of self, no identity. Witnessing these things was heartbreaking. So in time, I worked with many of my colleagues to develop culturally appropriate programs and services, living arrangements for kids where the culture could be recognized. And many kids began to start finding their way back to their home fire from there. I recognize this is a problem, and I I very much sympathize with those social workers who see this day in, day out, and of course our advocates that are out there seeing this day in and day out. I ask you, what's more important? Is food and shelter more important than belonging and identity? That's a question we should be asking ourselves. About the same time that I was working in Alberta, here in Manitoba, the political organizations of the day, the Assembly of Manitoba Chiefs included, had signed a new MOU, a Memorandum of Understanding with the Province of Manitoba to begin implementing the recommendations of the Aboriginal Justice Inquiry Child Welfare Initiative. Key concepts in the recommendations included: First Nations and Métis people have a right to control the delivery of child and family services province-wide for their respective community members. CFS in Manitoba must occur in a manner which respects the unique status as well as cultural and linguistic heritage. The family is sacred and the first resource for the well-being of children. And solutions developed locally with respect to both the delivery of child and family services as well as adoption services are the most effective and practical approach towards ensuring self-determination and healthy communities. Some of you might remember this language because you may have helped craft it. The new approach to the provision of services for children in care at the time became known as devolution, and it included the creation of 4 authorities: a Northern Authority, a Southern Authority, a Métis Child and Family Service Authority, and a General Authority for all other families. The new approach to the provision of services for children was designed to ensure that no matter where a child lived in the province of Manitoba, they would receive services from Aboriginal agencies. These agencies would be mandated and enabled through the authorities, which I just previously mentioned. Within a short period of time, the number of children in care more than doubled in Manitoba. More than doubled. In 2008, I was elected chief back home in my community, and some of the most difficult tasks was to see the dispossession of children from their parents in crisis moments. No chief or counselor who has ever been in the role of leadership can say that they have not been faced with the difficult task of crisis management or the trauma that happens during community apprehension. The work is not only difficult for the social workers who carry the trauma from the work, but also for the community leadership. In community leadership, chiefs and councils are tasked with managing multiple lines of responsibility, including the safety of families. I recall a time back home when I was informed that a father was going to come to the band office with his rifle because his children had been apprehended, and he believed at the time that it was our fault. In time, by working with this father, he and myself were able to sit in the sweat lodge together and pray for a better future for his children. As a chief, I understood the challenges of advocating for families versus what my role was as a board member of a CFS agency. Being an advocate for my community, I discontinued my participation as a member of the board of the agency because of my belief in our fundamental role as advocates in leadership for the families and the children in our communities. And that is one of the very difficult tasks that leadership has, is balancing the expectations that policies and provincial laws have versus what your core responsibilities are in leadership and family advocacy at the community. I believe that at its core, leadership, chief and council, everybody has a responsibility first and foremost to the safety and protection of children and families in the community. By 2010, we started to understand that the system that we had agreed to create had massive flaws in implementation, and we needed to start moving toward restructuring once again. The principles of the Aboriginal Justice Inquiry Child Welfare Initiative were solid and they were meaningful, but they weren't being implemented the way they thought they would be. As chiefs, we decided to intervene at a special assembly called by the Southern Chiefs Organization. Myself, Chief Glenn Hudson, Chief Garnet Woodhouse, Chief Donovan Fontaine, and Chief Debbie Chief were appointed to the board of the Southern Authority by the Chiefs in Assembly to begin working on changing how the services would be delivered through the system we had signed on to only a decade earlier. At the same time that this step was being taken by the Chiefs, the federal government also announced that they were going to provide an enhanced funding model, which meant they were going to flood the CFS system with new money. And they sought endorsement from the Chiefs of Manitoba for that. I recall sitting at the AMC Assembly as the chief of my community asking why we would agree to more money being put into a system that was already taking children away from their families at a tragic rate. I was one of the only ones at the time questioning how we thought we would improve the system by putting more money into a broken system. And I recall there was other chiefs at the table with me at the time then too, chiefs that are in this room right now. After our appointment to the board, I called a special meeting of the board of directors under the regulations of the Southern Authority, and we were immediately met with a lawsuit that challenged the validity of our appointments as chiefs to be on that board. We found out very early after the lawsuit was filed that our appointments were being invalidated by a bylaw that had been passed by a couple of people on the board at the time without advice or input from the very leadership that created the authorities. Stories soon emerged in the newspaper, backed by legal advisors who were trying to convince the public that the chief's involvement in leadership as leaders of the CFS system was resulting in us putting children at risk. There were newspaper articles at the time, and if you check the archives, you'll be able to find them, that claimed that we were politically interfering and that our political interference would put children at risk as chiefs involved in the Southern Authority. I have since grown to understand that no one politicizes Indigenous children as well as provincial and federal colonial governments. With a new lawsuit in place, the province of Manitoba was called upon to see where they stood on the issue, and they claimed to take a neutral position on the matter, and they were no help in addressing the challenge that we had as chiefs trying to work with the Southern Authority at the time. Within months, I was elected as Grand Chief of the AMC, and we once again approached the province to help resolve the issues through what was then called, and is still called, the Leadership Council. In my initial meeting at the Leadership Council, I saw that it was an informal meeting, no decision-making protocols. No one was even taking notes. All that was there was snacks and coffee. After the meeting, I checked the provincial legislation and found that the Leadership Council was actually an advisory committee to the minister. And you don't need to believe me, just check the legislation. An advisory council to the minister who holds authority over and above other decision makers in the system. With this understanding, I decided that I would not attend the Leadership Council table any longer, as I did not believe that the chiefs of Manitoba nor the families from our communities would want the Grand Chief to sit as an advisor to the minister's CFS system. In time, the province showed its true colors when the number of duly appointed members of the board of the Southern Authority lapsed below the minimum number of board members identified in the bylaw. I maintained throughout that the board did not lapse because we had duly appointed chiefs on that board. The province demonstrated to us at the time that they were siding with the system because they put the Southern Authority under administration, which means that they chose not to believe that we had duly authorized and appointed chiefs on the board. That, to me, is how they showed their true colors in the system. They wanted to maintain the appearance of a valid system over and above the work of our communities in trying to get a grasp on this runaway system that was taking children away. At that time, I decided to switch gears and begin focusing on how we could build our own services outside the system to improve the quality that our families desperately needed here in Manitoba. In 2014, we began community engagement sessions through the Assembly. Sessions in the South and in the North, and we held them in an open tribunal system, similar to the way the Truth and Reconciliation Commission was holding their open forums. We had our Southern Forum at the Friendship Center, and people who were comfortable speaking out in public were able to come up to the microphone and share what their experiences were. And there was a number of people who wanted privacy. So AMC staff, with the help of the First Nations Health and Social Secretariat, had private sessions with people who were willing to share and document what was going on with their families within the system. In the North, we convened there as well. We also heard a number of stories from the North, and what was produced was the Bringing Our Children Home report. The Bringing Our Children Home report included primary recommendations. And these recommendations came from hearing dozens of aged out children in care, parents, social workers, agency administrators, professionals, and community leadership. The primary recommendation was that we open an Indigenous Family Advocates Office immediately, which would help families identify and protect their rights, navigate the system, and have their children returned to them. The challenge that I faced running the Assembly of Manitoba Chiefs was that I had told the Deputy Minister a couple years previous that I wasn't going to get my mandate from Ottawa. I was going to get my mandate from the communities. That was Deputy Minister Michael Wernick at the time. Some of you might know that name. When I said that, within a few months, they slashed our funding by 85% at the Assembly of Manitoba Chiefs. And we lost most of our staff to that massive budget cut at that time. Many of you might remember that. It caused me to reflect upon the utility and the practical application of our political organizations in the regions, how they function, and what is their value. I started to recognize that the ones that got the money were the ones that were pushing the agendas that were coming out of Ottawa or coming out of Broadway at the provincial government house there. Those are the organizations that get big budgets because oftentimes the agendas and mandates don't flow from our leadership in our communities. They flow from whatever the government of the day wants us to do. And that's called sponsored or agency representation. And I believe that's the state of our current political system, is to work within a sponsored or co-opted environment at every level. And it's a truth. I've witnessed it, and I own my truths. Fortunately, at the same time that we were challenged with keeping the organization moving forward, keeping the bills paid and the lights on, and I give a lot of credit to the staff at the time. Some of the staff are still there, for designing budgets that would withstand whatever it was the federal government was trying to do to us, and that I believe they were trying to close us down. Budgets were rearranged to keep the lights on and to keep a political voice moving forward. We operated at a minimal capacity according to the Constitution of the Assembly of Manitoba Chiefs. At the same time that this was going on, we were also opening the doors at our new casino. After great difficulty, we opened a casino on the Swan Lake First Nation reserve lands just outside of Carberry, Manitoba. Thanks to the diligent effort of one of our chiefs right here, Francine Meachus, that casino was built and it was opened. The tangible coming out of that event was about $15,000 a month to the Assembly of Manitoba Chiefs. This would be our own source revenue. This would not be money coming from a federal or provincial coffer to push their agenda. This would be AMC own source revenue to be decided upon and spent according to what we decided it to be. This was a unique moment because I saw the opportunity then to start our First Nations Family Advocate Office. Working with our administrators and our professional staff, our executive director and so forth, we put out a competition. And within a few weeks, we hired Cora Morgan as our First Nations Family Advocate and our Assistant Advocate, Kyra Wilson. That's how this started. That's how these things got rolling. It was because we stopped relying and looking to the province for solutions. We stopped relying and looking to the federal government for solutions, and we did it ourselves by coming together and working with what we had. Because this is the most difficult of times. And let me tell you that the office is the product of ceremony. And everything that has given it life today has sourced from ceremony. This is because the work is traumatic, and it requires a commitment to ceremony to ensure that the office moves forward in a grounded and respectful manner. It's important to mention this because many people over the years have stated that the office doesn't have authority or power because it was not mandated by the province of Manitoba. This differentiation in sources of power is important to mention because what's exposed here is the difference between man-made laws of the province and the natural laws of our people to take care of one another. That's where the differentiation is made. We don't need a provincial mandate to take care of one another and to make sure our kids are safe. All we need is a commitment from one another to do that. And that's what the basis and the foundation is from. Shortly after we opened the office, we began to see the trauma that's out there, that's hidden behind a veil of provincial confidentiality, statutory laws. The people are hurting, the families needed help, and I know that hundreds of children have been returned home since we opened the doors at that office. And I'll be forever grateful for the rest of my life for the work that was started and initiated at that time. And I encourage all of you from all the different places you've come from to identify your advocate, the one who's going to get in the way of the trauma, who's grounded and knows how to deal with it, knows how to overcome these policy issues, knows how to navigate the politics that gets in the way of these things, and work with them. You don't need a federal bill to enable that. All you need is a commitment from the people, the commitment of families to once again work towards taking care of one another. That's what this is all about. It's not about new federal legislation, it's about taking responsibility back at the home fire. One of the major developments that happened in the early days of the creation of the Advocate's Office was the recognition that on a daily basis a baby is being apprehended from the hospitals. And it was with that information that I could not bear that information, because I too had been intervened with as a baby at the hospital at St. Boniface when I was born. Such a mighty struggle ensued that I had to go to the Sundance, because that's my belief system. I had to go to the Sundance and sacrifice, because otherwise I would have gone to war in another way, and it wouldn't have been a good way. I had to deal with the pain and the trauma of what I experienced and what I'd heard of what's going on by going into the ceremonies and giving up. I gave up. And it's our elders, our ceremony elders, that helped me get through. During that time, people say that Nepinak left politics, but I say maybe politics left me. And I started to see the world in a bit of a different light. I saw the need to go back to my home fire to reconcile some of the unfinished work of my own life. You know, and I'm happy to say that I don't travel as much. I'm home a lot. And I've met, you know, and been around many of the benchmarks of my little ones as they've transitioned, you know, into the different aspects of their own lives. And I'm there, and they know I'm their safety each and every day. And that's what's important to me. That's what's most important to me now. And I believe that's what the home fire is all about, is having that security around for our little ones to hopefully thrive when they get their chance. So that's my presentation to you. I've been through a lot and I've seen a lot. And I would say that many of us carry that trauma day to day, you know, from the work we do and the work we've done. And I commend all of you. Those of you who are at the front lines dealing with these issues day to day. Doesn't matter, you know, your job title, you still feel the trauma and you still have to work through it, just like we all do. And we're all in this together. So thank you for your time. I wish I had a song to sing and stuff, and I'm not a very funny guy, you know, and I couldn't carry a note in a bucket if I tried, so thank you for your time. Miigwech, safe travels.
Thank you so much, Derek. Derek Nepinak, former Grand Chief of Assembly of Manitoba Chiefs. There's a number of things that that we can reflect on that in his presentation, that leadership is a difficult place to be. And we need to carry each other and lift each other up, because sometimes it's really hard to be in the lead, whether it's family, community, or in our nation. And I can sense that. When Idle No More broke here in Winnipeg in November of 2012, Derek was working hard on the missing and murdered Indigenous women issue. And he sat in circles, private circles. When the grandmothers asked him to come, he would come. And he would take direction. And I had the fortunate, I was fortunate to be able to witness that humility and that strength, and how he lifted that respect within himself, you know, and just listened to the grandmothers. And I remember that time, 85% of funding that was cut, and it sent a shockwave in the community. And that's what happens when they starve us out. They've been doing that for a long time, because they feel threatened by our truth and how much we love and how much we respect who we are. And the power of memory, he mentioned that ceremony is rooted in the First Nations Family Advocate Office. It is so very true. It is a very, very difficult work, as you all know, when we're working to protect our children and our families. And I can't help but be emotional. I've been reflecting on all the speakers, and everybody saying the same messages, that we love our children, we love our family, we love who we are. So lift each other up and take care of each other. Miigwech. Miigwech, Derek.